Today, I'm introducing our 7th webinar. So this has been a webinar series all about transforming children's care. So we've had different webinars on many different topics. And this is all under the Global Collaborative Platform, which is bringing people together to look at different issues related to care reform. If you're interested in learning more about the collaborative platform, we'll put the link in the chat box to find out more and to see how you can get involved. Now, this specific webinar is about lessons learned on developing and strengthening foster care systems. And we're going to be looking at a variety of different contexts. We're going to look at Bulgaria, the United Kingdom, Bangladesh, and also, hold on, sorry. And also Uganda, and we're talking about a variety of different, and Cambodia, and we're talking about a variety of different settings. And you can see that some of these settings are well-established foster care systems, whereas others are just developing. But the focus today is really on learning from those with systems that have been doing it for a while, and also those who are developing systems about some of the things that they've done, the areas that they want to improve, and where we think we can continue to move forward on developing quality foster care placements for children globally. If you have any questions, do place them in the chat box and we'll collect them at the end of the session. I would like to introduce our lovely panelists today. So we're going to start with Galina. Galina, many of you know Galina. Galina Bisset has over 20 years of experience in the design and development of social services for children and families in the context of deinstitutionalization. She's currently a consultant technical advisor for deinstitutionalization and alternative care at Hope and Homes for Children. And she's designed and delivered training programs across diverse contexts around the world. Today, she's going to be speaking specifically about the experience of Bulgaria. And then we're going to have Louise. Louise Cox has 20 years of experience supporting children and young people in a variety of settings. She's worked as a social worker and a manager within fostering services in the United Kingdom, for Child's Eye Foundation in Uganda, and now for the Martin James Foundation. And her current role involves working alongside partner organizations in developing family strengthening services and alternative family-based care. So I'm going to start with those two, and then we will have some audience questions, and then I'll go on to the other 3 participants. Should we start with Galina? Oh, sorry. This is just the run of the show here. So Louise and Galina will be presenting. Great. So, oh, sorry, first we'll start with Louise and then we'll go to Galina. Sorry, Galina. Welcome, Louise.
Thank you, Rebecca. Hello, my name's Louise and I work for the Martin James Foundation, as Rebecca just said. But my background is in foster care in England, and it's my pleasure today to talk to you about some of the lessons that have been learned in the development and strengthening of that system. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. And the next one. Thank you. It's believed that foster care in England dates back to the 1800s, when a child first went to live with a family that was unrelated, and that child continued to be the legal responsibility of the government. The Children Act in 1948 stipulated that the government had a duty to provide care for any child whose parents were unable to care for them. Some of the significant legislation that's currently used is the Children Act from 1989, and that's the primary legislation for governing children who are looked after by the government in alternative care. And that act had much more emphasis on keeping children with their families, keeping them together where possible. The framework for the conduct of what fostering services should deliver includes the Fostering Service Regulations and the National Minimum Standards. The standards have been devised to help foster care providers to implement foster care and also give a framework for inspection. There's a separate government department that inspects fostering service and makes sure that they're compliant with the fostering regulations. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Here's some government statistics from March 2020, when there were 12 million children in England, of which there were 400,000 children receiving some form of support from their local social service. This might have been children who were still living with their families or children who were in alternative care. The foster care system is government-led and supported, and that includes foster carers receiving allowance to help them to care for the children. There's both government and non-government organisations that provide foster care, with about 430 agencies in total. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So of the 400,000 children that are being supported by social services in some way, there are 78,000 children living in alternative care and 56,500 children living in family-based care. And as you can see down the right-hand side of the slide, there are 16% that are in formally assessed kinship care and 84% in foster care of different types. There are 44,500 fostering families in total, 70% of which are foster carers are in couples and 30% are single caregivers. So where you can see that the 75,000 approved foster carers, that accounts for the couples whereby each person in the household has to be a formally approved foster carer. The majority of foster carers in England are over 50 years of age, and a significant percentage of them are over 65 years of age. The process of approval consists of a social work assessment, which includes checks and references, followed by an alternative care panel. The role of the panel is to make a recommendation that then goes back to the agency, whether that's government or non-government, for a final decision on the approval of the foster carers. It's quite a long process, it's detailed and quite intrusive, and it can take anywhere between about 3 to 6 months to complete. The recruitment of carers is a consistent issue in England, and that's possibly due to the process that I've just described. It can feel really big and off-putting, but also to recruit families that reflect the identity of the children that we're caring for. It remains the expectation that prospective carers approach the agency and apply to foster. And I think this probably excludes a lot of families who are unlikely to approach the authorities. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. I've worked in different alternative care settings for a while, originally as a carer in a residential children's home about 20 so years ago, and then beginning work in foster care in 2005. As a carer and as a newly qualified social worker in foster care, I walked into a system that had all the policies and case management tools in place. And there were lots of experienced practitioners around me, which was incredibly helpful. But so often it felt like the system wasn't particularly made to fit around the children, but that the children had to fit into a system. And I very often felt like, why are we not moving forward, and why do I feel like I'm failing the children that I'm trying to support? So I've highlighted a couple of areas here from my own experience that I think would have been really helpful to have played a more significant part of the development of the foster care system originally. They're both related to putting the children at the centre of our processes, one being child participation and the other trauma-informed approaches. They are being addressed, but continue to challenge us in some respects. My view is that both of these things are interlinked. For us to have a true and genuine participation of children and young people, we need to understand how we connect with children who may have experienced trauma. I recently attended a webinar that was facilitated by someone who had experience of being in foster care in the UK. And he said, there's such a lot of emphasis on children who don't engage. And I think I've certainly said that before, I can't get this child to engage with us. And he suggested that we consider that it's actually the service and us that hasn't yet connected with the child, looking at it the other way around, putting the emphasis back on the responsibility of the service to ensure that we're listening to all children, not just the children that are ready to offer their views. Both of these areas have progressed. There is a clear acknowledgement that children's views need to be heard at an individual level in terms of care planning and decision making. And steps have been taken to retrospectively bring children's views into reviewing policy and procedure at a national level. And this has impacted on the implementation of services locally. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. I've got some examples here of some of the challenges and the practical ways that this is being addressed. One of the big challenges, as I said, is getting genuine input from children and integrating this into each layer of our work. So providing the right environment for children to be able to speak freely, as well as us being prepared for children telling us things that we actually might not want to hear and being open to that. I think very often it seems that getting children's views has been a nice thing to have and something that we put on the end of a process, and it can be tokenistic rather than something that's essential and integrated into each aspect of what we're doing. The other part of that has been the importance of us acting on the views we've gathered. I think we got a lot better at consulting children, but then it's what we do with it next that's important. There needs to be action and change. The ways this is being addressed in England are through children being consulted and having more meaningful contributions to processes. For example, reviewing their care plans, and more about empowering children so we do the review with the child rather than having the review done about them or to them. In my previous role in a fostering service, we had a children's committee locally, and that local committee elected representatives that attended a national committee to feed back into policy and procedure. Children would talk to other children and encourage them to speak up, which was a really effective way to engage with children who might have been reluctant to talk to social workers or adults. Have the next slide, please. Thank you. So in order for us to achieve all of that, we needed to consider the needs of children, how they might experience relationships, and therefore how we might connect with them. When I first started as a social worker, foster carers asked me all the time, what can I do and what can I say, and how can I meaningfully support this child in my care? And I often felt that I didn't know how to support carers in this respect. It was about probably 10 years ago when I had a first meeting with a therapist. There was me and the foster carer and the therapist, and we talked about how the child might be experiencing us and the care we were trying to provide. And for me, it had a big impact to starting at trying to understand children and then working out from that perspective rather than understanding just the social work process. It felt like a really new concept for me, and it has had a big impact on my work since then. In England, we started to provide this type of support for foster carers, including these types of discussions in preparation training and ongoing training for foster carers. So just to finish, there's still a lot to do, and I think there isn't or shouldn't be a system that is a finished product. We've got a lot to review and adapt and progress and learn from each other, from practitioners, from foster carers, from systems in other countries, but most importantly from those with lived experience and from the children and young people themselves. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I'll pass back to Rebecca. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Louise. Really interesting. And there's a few questions in the question box. Please do ask your questions using the Q&A function if you can. And we'll have a few of those questions after Galina speaks. And then we'll also have more question and answers after all the panelists have spoken. So Galina, can I hand over to you?
Thank you. Dear colleagues, I will talk about the development of foster care in Bulgaria, and my professional life has been closely connected with this because it developed over the last 20 years. Bulgaria was part of the Eastern Bloc of socialist countries, which emerged after the Second World War and until 1989. During that period, there was a substantial institutional care system for children, and in the 90s, it is estimated that around 30,000 children were living in institutions, as this was the only solution for children at risk, and families having difficulties raising their children. In 1991, Bulgaria ratified the UNCRC and started developing its child protection system. It developed the child protection departments at the local level, but governed and managed by the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection. Until then, parents used to negotiate directly with directors of institutions to place their children for a short while or for a longer period of time. After the establishment of the child protection departments, they started to gatekeep and to work on the individual cases of children at risk, with the idea of preventing their placement in institutions. During the early 2000s, the first alternative care services were piloted mostly by international NGOs, such as Care International, Save the Children, Every Child. These were initially daycare centers, rehabilitation centers, but also the first foster care pilot projects emerged during this period. On the basis of the foster care pilot projects done by the international NGOs and their local partners, the government of Bulgaria developed the first regulation of foster care in 2004, which was largely based on the British model. It allowed only for voluntary foster care. Basically, foster carers would receive an allowance for the cost of the children. It didn't raise much interest because it was a very turbulent period where Bulgaria was moving from a centralized economy, state-run economy, to a free market economy. There was a lot of instability, political and economic. People lost their jobs. A lot of people emigrated to the West, America, Canada, and so on. So very few people became foster parents, mostly because they knew some children from institutions. They had kept in contact with them and really wanted to take them home and raise them until they reached adulthood. A couple of years later, the government adopted a second regulation of foster care in force from 2007, which allowed for two types of foster care, voluntary and paid foster care. The paid foster carers would receive salaries, but they would also have to professionalize, to work closely with the child protection departments, and to be ready to take more complex children. As you would see from the figures, between 2006 and 2010, foster care was developing very slowly in Bulgaria. It was mostly a scattered initiatives of NGOs, some service providers like centers of social support who are managed by NGOs with interest in foster care, and the state was paying lip service to the development. It was delegated to the child protection departments, who were not that much interested, as it was still easier for them to place children at risk in institutions rather than develop foster care and be responsible for children in foster placement around the clock. Next slide, please. It was unheard of by 2010 of babies to be placed in foster care. It was considered to be a medical issue, and newborn children were always placed in baby institutions. But gradually, there was some breakthrough again on the initiative and the push of NGOs that some child protection departments place newborn children in existing foster families. 2010 was a big landmark in the reform of childcare in Bulgaria. The government launched a strategy for closing all institutions for children, and the deadline was set at 2025. This strategy was translated into an action plan, which contained different activities by the government and the national institutions, but also it featured 5 national projects for closing institutions and reforming the system with EU money, the structural funds of the European Union. One of these national projects was on foster care, developing foster care on a national scale. At that point, there were about 7.7 thousand children in 137 institutions. The number of children in foster care was very low. Next slide, please. When this National Foster Care Project was launched in 2012, it did lead to a significant increase in the number of foster parents and children placed in foster care. These were children mostly from institutions that were being closed down, but also as a prevention of placing children in institutions, because the institutions had to close down, and there was a number of projects and a timeline and a structure to accomplish this purpose. As you would see from the numbers, the number of foster families and children rose in 2016, then it started to decline slightly, and at the moment it has stabilized at around 2,000 foster families and 2,000 children placed in foster care. By the end of 2015, all 25 institutions for disabled children were closed. By 2020, last year, all institutions for children without parental care were closed, and 28 of the 32 baby homes leaving Bulgaria at the moment, with only 4 baby homes housing around 200 children. Also, from the numbers, you would notice that the voluntary foster care in Bulgaria again remains at very low level. These are usually people who want to raise a particular child. It tends to be long-term, while the overwhelming majority of foster care is professional, and people have to deal with the serious cases of children at risk needing this type of care. Next slide, please. What is the general picture so that you are able to understand these numbers? In kinship placement, which is formal, and the court makes the placement order in the extended family, and the extended family undergoes an assessment process. They receive also an allowance for the children if their income is below a certain minimum. We have around 6,000 children. In the so-called small-scale residential care, or the small group homes, we have approximately 3,400 children. Half of them are typical, half of them are with disabilities. These are mostly children from the closed institutions for typical children and for children with disabilities. In foster care, we have approximately 2,000 children. The number of children with serious disabilities in foster care is extremely low, and these 180 children are with mild to moderate disabilities. And we have 200 children in baby institutions that are due to close this year, but because of COVID, it will be done next year. We have 3 types of foster care by regulation: emergency, short-term, up to a year, and long-term, over a year. But when foster parents are approved, it's in their profile what type of foster care they're most suited for and what they wish as well. But we do not have this movement of a child from an emergency placement to a short-term placement to a long-term placement. Usually, child protection considers the different options for the child and what placement is likely to be needed, and then decide which foster parent is most suitable for the needs of the children. Sometimes they may be placed on emergency basis and stay for 6 months, 1 year, sometimes longer, but they stay in the same foster family. And of course, age consideration is important for placing children on a long-term basis. Next slide. So let's look at the roles of government and civil society. I would say that civil society, or the NGOs, were the driving force behind the development of foster care in Bulgaria. They pioneered foster care, developed the first regulations, did projects to scale up foster care. When they became providers of social services within which they can develop foster care, they went for it, although it wasn't mandatory. And they didn't receive a financial incentive for that, but they believed that it was important for children to be in a family care. They developed different models of regional foster care centers. The Pride model was introduced, and a number of practitioners were trained in Bulgaria in Pride. Until the national project, which started in 2012, foster families were recruited and managed by the child protection departments. And the salaries were paid and the allowances were paid from the national budget. NGOs could run campaigns, they could train, supervise, monitor, They can provide support services to foster parents and the foster children, either within projects with external funding or if they were running centers of social support funded by the state. However, since the start of the national project, the whole system of foster care was changed. Families are recruited, trained, managed by foster care teams employed under the project, and these foster care teams are based at the local authorities. They are managed by the mayor, so to say, and their salaries and running costs are paid from the project with EU money. This tends to lead to a centralized foster care campaign, which was good initially because it made foster care well known to the population of Bulgaria. Bulgarians learned through this centralized campaign what foster care is, what it isn't, the differences between fostering and adoption, and so on. So initially it played a positive role in the popularization of foster care as a type of service. But in the current system, the foster care teams can only work with the foster parents. They are not allowed to meet and work with the children. Only child protection departments can meet and work with the children. And the third actor, the NGOs, they have been cut out from the national project to a large extent. They can be contacted by local authorities for training and supervision of the foster care teams, or they can do direct supervision of the foster families. And with respect to the children, they can provide therapeutic services to the foster children within centers of social support or rehabilitation centers that they manage. But they used to be involved with children around the issues of foster care, their placement, how they feel, and supporting both foster parents and children. Now they can only train and supervise, and they can only provide therapeutic services to the children, but they are not in the center of the foster care provision. Because there is no financial standard that makes possible the development of foster care, there is no foster care outside the national project. Next slide. I would say that being a middle income country, we were low middle income. Now we're probably still low middle income country. This affects the profile of the foster parents, of the people interested in fostering. They tend to be older people, pre-retirement, early retirement, more in rural locations where income opportunities are very limited. The downside of this is that they have very fixed ideas of raising children, and it's difficult to change their mindsets and to explain that these are different children, and they have a lot of issues, including attachment issues and difficult behavior and so on. So having the majority of foster parents being older people, more in rural locations with secondary education, it is because of that profile, it's a little bit difficult to place children with disabilities or with troubled behavior or large groups of siblings. The disabled children need more physical abilities in the foster parents. They also need access to high quality medical services, which are not available in the rural locations. The children with troubled behavior really require different personality of foster parent, and older people are not able to manage and to handle large groups of siblings. I would say that the national project boosted the number of children.
You just have one minute left.
1 minute, but it was at the expense of quality. And as I said, NGOs were disregarded, and their involvement in the development of foster care at the moment is very, very limited and very negligible. The problem being that fostering is still difficult for the difficult categories of children. Disabled children, those with troubled behavior, and large groups of siblings. And I would say that looking back, we moved from a very scattered NGO-driven system of foster care provision to a very regimented national model that doesn't fully meet the needs of all children needing alternative care. And we need a more flexible base for foster care development in the future and more project-based innovation for the difficult groups of children who need and deserve living in a family but are currently sent to small-scale residential care to the small group homes. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so we have some questions. I'm just going to ask 2 questions now to you, and then I'll open up to the regular panelist. I also just realized that I haven't introduced myself. My name is Rebecca Smith, and I'm the global head for child protection programs at Save the Children International, and I've been working on alternative care for the past 10 years. But just in terms of focusing on some of the questions that have come in, we have a question about supporting children with disabilities in foster care. So it'd be interesting for both Galina and Louise to think about how do you support the placement of children with disabilities into foster families? Is there anything specific training or a profile of foster carers that is different for those that are caring for children with disabilities or not? And there was also a question of the different types of foster care that are provided in your context. So, you know, is there specialized foster care? Is there holiday or emergency care or other forms of foster care? So can I open it up to both of you just for a few minutes of reflection?
In terms of caring for children with disabilities, I mean, I think sometimes we do have specific recruitment campaigns for carers for children with disabilities. I think the main thing for us is it plays a significant part of the assessment process, and thinking about what have been the previous experience of those prospective carers and how they're set up to care for children with disability, whether that's something about their home environment or their skills and what the child's needs are. And potentially we might support a family to prepare for that. And there could be specific training dependent, but in terms of packages of care, that might lead sort of nicely onto the next question. There might be a package of care that might involve some respite care as well and some short breaks for those carers, but significantly working with the family too. And then in terms of different types of care, yeah, there's the respite care. We do have emergency care, short-term and long-term. Children could be permanently matched with foster carers. We also would have what's called child and parent fostering, where the parent moves in with the child as part of perhaps an assessment process as well.
Shall I answer now, Rebecca? Well, I would say that in Bulgaria, very seldom people come forward with the desire to be foster parents of disabled children. They usually prefer typical children, ideally preschool age, but during the assessment process, if they are seen to be able to have the capacity, the resources, the mindset, and so on, to take disabled children, they're encouraged to put this in their profile. For this, they receive additional specialized training, a few more hours on the different disabilities, and they are motivated and persuaded that actually they can be good foster parents of disabled children. Also, we have found in the early days, especially 2012, 2013, when we started closing baby institutions, that foster parents, existing foster parents, could be a good resource to be developed into specialist foster parents for disabled children. And we did some play sessions with disabled children in the baby institution, during which play sessions they actually realized that these children are not so scary and they can cope, and they fell in love with them. And it was very easy then to organize the placement of children into foster care. Hope and Homes, because we needed foster care for babies and disabled children, we filled, that was a slide that I missed, we filled a lot of gaps in the provision of foster care, especially in the area of additional costs that acted as disincentives for foster parents to take babies and to take disabled babies or young disabled children. Some were related to transport costs of matching visits, because foster parents didn't have this extra resource and children were far away from where they lived. Transport costs to receive high quality medical care away from the place of living, which was the main concern. And transport costs of intensive visits to support the parents in the early days. Also the cost of baby equipment, milk, diapers, and the initial investment in cots, mattresses, pillows, which was again something that foster parents struggled with financially. And of course, adaptation of the home and specialist aids, which tend to be very expensive in Bulgaria for children. It was not long ago that specialist wheelchairs for children were actually provided free for children with disabilities. And from the beginning of this year, the allocation in foster care for babies and for disabled children was increased, the allocation, so that all these costs that Hope and Homes incurred over the years are now built in the system, and foster parents are more supported financially to bear the costs of taking children with disabilities and serious illnesses.
Great, thank you, Galina. Those were great answers. There's still quite a few questions in the chat box. We will have a question and answer period at the end, so we're not forgetting the questions that you've asked. And also the panelists, if you have time to look at the questions as well. I'm going to turn over to our next presenter, whose name is David. David Adoke has 15 years of experience in child protection and working with vulnerable children and families. He's worked at Uganda's National Referral Hospital as a social worker and is currently project manager and safeguarding lead at the Child's Eye Foundation, where his current role includes working with partners to implement deinstitutionalization and strengthening communities. David, can I turn over to you? Welcome.
Thank you, Rebecca. My name is David, as Rebecca has introduced. So I'm just going to dive right into it. I'll be talking about foster care and the context in Uganda. So we have an estimated 19% or 4.8 million children who are living in kinship care, that is in Uganda. We as civil society organizations usually run foster care schemes, fostering a number of children every year. Of course, the biggest leader in this is government, and most especially our probation and social welfare officers who are at district level across the country. We have an estimated 40,000 to 50,000 children living in residential care facilities in Uganda. We also call them children's homes. So this is just an estimation. One thing that we are trying to work toward is actually getting the actual number of children who are actually in children's homes. So as of last year, December 2020, we had an estimated nearly 41,000 registered unaccompanied and separated refugee children within the country. So these children generally live with extended family within the camps or with foster families in refugee settlements, and these are mostly supported by the UN Commission that has the mandate to deal with the refugees. Next slide, please. So what is the foster care system in our country? We do have formal and informal or non-formalized foster care. So we have formal foster care, which goes through the normal processes of the courts of law and supervised by the probation and social welfare officer who sit at district levels across Uganda. We have the courts of law who supervise and who actually give out for the foster care orders. And these are also provided for under our Mother Act for dealing with children. That is the Children Act. We had this act amended in 2016 to include specifically issues concerning with foster care and adoption. We have informal foster care, which we have kinship care, which falls under this kind of foster care, and where we have children placed in families where a carer or a foster carer is related to the family. But this also includes care for children by carers who actually have no relation to the children. So this has been going on for, I would say, for as long as we know. But this kind of foster care is actually usually unregulated by the probation officers and also by the courts of law. It is done within the community, so long as maybe we would say a child is actually going to lose the parents, and maybe a brother or auntie or an uncle is actually going to take up that child as one of their own. So this is usually not documented. So we cannot have the exact numbers of some of these settlements and placements that the children are in. So like, yeah, in foster care, informal foster care is not documented, and we don't have statistics of children under such arrangements. Formal foster care, as my colleagues have mentioned before, takes a very long process. We have somebody expressing interest, and after which they are taken through a thorough assessment. Louise mentioned, yes, sometimes it may go from between 3 to 6 months. So it's a very tedious process. Or a civil society organization like Child's Eye who comes in to do the assessments. Foster care parents, the prospective foster carers then undergo training, and then they are also presented to an alternative care panel for approval. We have various alternative care panels set up in various districts where we are supporting. We have about 3 districts where we've set up panels in 2. We hope to scale up to 3 more. So these are panels where we have government officials sitting on them together with civil society organizations working in child protection, trying to see that most of the parents who actually approved for the foster parent is matched with a child who has actually
David, you're breaking up a little bit.
been approved also for, sorry, apologies, is that better?
Yes, a little bit better, yes.
Okay, can we go on to the next slide? So what is the role of government and civil society? Government, we see, has the overall mandate when it comes to foster care. We have various guidelines that we have to follow, various guidelines and policies that regulate and govern foster care. We have the Children Act, as I mentioned. We have our National Foster Care Guidelines as of 2019. However, these are in draft form. We're still trying to see how we can work with government to finalize this. We have the National Children's Policy 2020 that was approved and disseminated, which focuses on child protection, child participation, system strengthening, and also looking at the survival and development of children. We do assessment and recommendations of prospective foster carers, but that is just a supportive role to the government. Government has the overall lead on this. Government is also the one responsible for approval of foster carers and children in need of foster care. Government places children in foster care and is mandated to supervise all foster care placements. So if a child is actually in foster care and you may need medical attention, like a serious surgical procedure to be done on a child who is in foster care and whom a civil society organization is supporting, government actually has to give that permission for the child to be able to go through that procedure. Government, and most specifically our probation officers, the ones who actually recommend to the courts for grant of foster care orders and adoption orders for children in need of foster care. Next slide, please. So when was foster care established? It was provided for under the Children Act of 1997 and as amended with the Children Act of 2016. I've talked about some of our draft guidelines, the foster care guidelines that were drafted in 2019. We have a national framework for alternative care in Uganda that was developed in 2012, and it guides on the different care options and also provides, yes, for the continuum of care. This is also under review, and we hope that this is actually going to become a policy very soon. We're working towards that. The communities, like I've said, have always practiced foster care within their different contexts for a very long time, but though it has been unregulated, we've had kinship care happen at community levels across all the communities in Uganda. So,
David, can you just a few more minutes, just to keep the time?
Thank you. All right, so we have recently gotten support Foundation, and we'll be reviewing the training practice. And we want to make the model of foster care in Uganda to review what can be improved and shared across all our programming. Child's Eye also started implementing foster care as we prepare to transition from our baby's home, which closed in 2017. Rebecca, next slide, please. So I've touched already on this civil society, what we do. We do sensitization and promotion of foster care, recruiting foster carers whom we then assess together with government. We have them trained and build their capacities on being able to take children in. We do referral of children in need of foster care to the government agencies, the probation officers. We support the probation officers as well with monitoring and supervision of children in foster care. And one thing that we also do is strengthening households and communities for them to be able to prepare and be able to take children in. Next slide, please. So kinship care, I've talked about it, is considered one of our primary alternative care options, after which, as my colleagues have talked about, we have short-term and emergency foster care as well. We also have what we call long-term foster care as one of the long-term options. I think we've talked about this. Next slide. Yes, here are the predominant forms of foster care that we have. Kinship, where we have known family members. Emergency, which is 3 to 6 months, but sometimes up to a year. Long-term foster care, which goes on until someone reaches adulthood. We have fostering to adopt, which is a more permanent placement for foster care. So these are the numbers of foster carers, prospective, potential foster carers that we identified in 2020 and 2021. These are 164. We had 122 who were trained. We had 97 who were approved. And currently we have about 46 families actually who have taken in children. Next slide, Rebecca. So all our foster carers are supported to economically strengthen them for them to be able to take children in. We have a partnership with Martin James currently, and with Thrive, a local civil society organization. We have partnerships with Wakiso, is it one of the new districts that we want to work with currently. And all these foster carers that we work with are registered with the local government during the approval processes. And they also provide homes for children transition from institutions, those who within are experiencing and at risk of abuse, and those who have actually been separated from their families. Next slide. So this is the process that I was talking about recruiting foster carers, where we identify them, we assess them, we take them through training, screening and approval. And just to note that we have many potential foster carers who will actually drop off at any one of these stages. So we may identify 80, but at the end of it all, you will have about 10 foster parents actually who go through the whole process and are approved. So it is something that is not set in stone. I think we'll go to the last slide. Yes, some of our challenges that have also been highlighted. Children with special needs is something that we're still also trying to grapple with. They don't have enough specialized foster carers to deal with children who have special needs. We have some children who have actually spent about 6 years in foster care just because no family is actually willing to take them in. One special challenge we've also seen is the cultural context of some of the children we work with. Certain community members are not willing to take in children who are associated with certain tribes. So that is something that is really hard. They have certain contexts where they think certain children from certain tribes are actually not very easy to look after, and they don't want to take them in. We've also transitioned from a salaried model of staff from the children's home. This has been a very big learning for us. The salaried model versus using a model where there are no incentives for foster carers. That is a learning for us. And it has helped us actually manage expectations of the new foster carers whom we've actually brought on board to take in children. So that is a big learning for us. And we need to actually document the process as we go through the different models of foster care so that we come up with one that is actually solid for us and will be beneficial for all of us. So that is it that I had. Thank you, Rebecca. Back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. Very interesting. I'm just going to pass over next to Soreni. Soreni is a Cambodian physiotherapist who helped to develop the ABLE project, which is a disability support project which enables disability inclusive family-based alternative care services within the local community. And she works with the local NGO, Children and Families. Children and Families provides family preservation support, kinship care, foster care, and support for domestic adoption in Cambodia. Can I pass over to you, Soreni?
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Rainy. I am from Children and Family in Cambodia. Today, I would like to talk about the establishment and development of foster care in Cambodia. There has been informal foster care in Cambodia many years, but it was not until 2004 that an NGO called Mật Sầm Lánh, part of Friend International, developed a pilot project to attempt introduce foster care to Cambodia in a formal way. At that time, the government of Cambodia had very few laws covering alternative care, and there were no law for foster care. Other NGOs include Children and Families that did similar foster care projects, but the majority of people and organizations still look mainly to institutional care for orphan and vulnerable children. By 2008, Cambodia had law in place regarding minimum standards for alternative care. The Cambodian government was starting to recognize the negative impact of relying so heavy on orphanages to take care of children and the need to work on their solution. More organizations began to develop family-based care, best alternative care, and networks were developed to promote collaboration between these organizations and to promote both coordination between NGO and the Cambodian government. So the government began to take more responsibility for the regulation of family-based alternative care, but the implementation was done and is still being done by NGO. That is starting the change as the most recent government policy that has been developed assigns certain government worker key role in recruiting and monitoring foster care families. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, institutional care was heavily used in Cambodia. In 2015, a mapping exercise revealed that there were over 16,000 children under age 18 living in residential care institutions and over 9,000 more living in other non-family resident facilities. In contrast to foster care, which is only available in a few areas in Cambodia, there are OCI in all but one Cambodian province. Of course, informal kinship care and foster care have always existed to some degree, but it is difficult to know the number of children who are living in those arrangements. There are currently 9 NGOs in Cambodia providing foster care. Many of which also support kinship care. Currently, the total number of children in formal foster care through Cambodia is 199. The number of those children who has disability is 35. Next slide, please. Today, foster care continue to operate through cooperation between local government authority and NGO. As every act, a network of organizations commit to family-based care for all Cambodian children was started in 2014. Through every act, NGOs such as Children in Family have access to support and a platform for strong collaboration. Right now, each organization has its own policy and procedure for recruiting, supervising, supporting, and training foster carers. But new law has been passed which will increase the government role and help to standardize foster care practice. One of the historical to foster care in Cambodia is that even though there is a large amount of research which support promoting family-based care, there has been resistance to move away from use of institution and a lack of confidence of foster care. This is gradually begin change with a lot of effort at awareness raising. Another challenge is that social work as established profession is relatively new in Cambodia and availability of well-trained social service workers is limited, affecting the quality of support for foster care family and children in foster care. Most of children and families live in rural areas. There are fewer services available in this area and service providers have to travel a lot to get to the families. As is the case, there are some children who are harder to place than others. In Cambodia, children with disability or chronic health problem is fall into these categories as well as older children, especially boys. Potential foster family fear that an older boy may have behavior issue that they are unprepared to deal with. Next slide, please. If Cambodia could start over in its development of foster care, I would have a few recommendations. For one, there could have been more effort to protect the rights of children with disability from the very beginning. When policy and procedure are developed without thinking about how to make the inclusive of children with disability, there will automatically be discrimination against them. Another suggestion is there should have been more government ownership from the beginning. Finally, improve donor awareness about the negative impacts of institutional care and advocacy for families-based alternative care. Who has helped to promote the advancement of foster care earlier on. Instead, foster care faced resistance from many donors who were committed to support of institutional care. Thank you for your attention, and I hope that we can learn from each other experience to promote family-based care around the world. Thank you, everyone.
Wonderful, thank you. What a really interesting presentation. I'm going to pass on to our last speaker, Taslima, and then I'll open it up for all of your wonderful questions. So please do continue to write the questions in the box. Now, Taslima Begum is a case management specialist for Save the Children, and she works in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. After getting a master's degree in special education from the University of Dhaka, she started working in the Rohingya refugee context as a case management officer back in 2017, immediately after the influx of refugees. Since then, she's focused primarily on case management, alternative care, mainstreaming protection across other sectors, community engagement in case management, and psychosocial support for children. And she's also been working to look at foster care within the host community in Bangladesh. I'm going to hand over to you, Taslima.
Thanks a lot, Rebecca. So good evening, everyone. As Rebecca said, this is Taslima working with Save the Children, currently at Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh. So today I'm going to talk about the foster care system in Bangladesh based on our experience at Cox's Bazar. Next slide, please. Yeah, so since August 2017, following a targeted campaign of violence by Myanmar military, over than 710,000 Rohingya refugees have arrived at Cox's Bazar, and this area became the largest refugee camp of the world. So currently there are 860,000 Rohingya refugees are living in 34 settlement camps. So Save the Children is working here for both Rohingya refugee communities and also for Bangladeshi communities. But in my today's presentation, I will focus more on foster care system in Rohingya community. So children represent 52% of Rohingya refugee population in Cox's Bazar and 53% in the host community. So in the Rohingya community, many children became separated from their primary caregivers due to the displacement. And according to our multi-sectoral need assessment of 2021, child labor and separations were both reported have increased in this community. Also, given the size and layout of the camps, it's very easy for the young children to get lost and become separated from the family. There are stigma and discrimination against unwed mothers that can make it very difficult for an unmarried women and girls to take care for her child and get access to the services. Next slide, please. Yeah, so there are several child protection issues which are linked to the care arrangement. So in the Rohingya community, based on our case management information, we found like such types of concerns which are separated, unaccompanied children, and also children living on the streets, unwanted, abandoned children at risk of violence, abuse, and exploitation in their family and community, and also children in conflict or contact with the law often need alternative care arrangement. So separation and being unaccompanied is a consistent concern for Rohingya community. On the other hand, for the Bangladeshi children, the major child protection concern is concerns are children living on the street without family, child marriage, child labor, and sexual exploitation. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the types of alternative care we are practicing in the Rohingya communities are foster care, kinship care, independent living, and residential care. So all of these are monitored or operated by non-government child protection agencies, and this is coordinated by the child protection subsector. So here we have different type of foster care arrangement. Like some are arranged by the organizations, and some are spontaneous. When a family is spontaneously taking care of a child without the support of any NGOs or organizations. So, and based on the duration of the stay, we have short-term and long-term foster care also. So based on our case management data, we can see like 24% children in alternative care are in different form of foster care, and 69% are in kinship care, which means 90% children are in different forms of family-based alternative care. It indicates that in the Rohingya community, the community people are very supportive, and especially family members and community peoples extended their support to the children who are without parental care. Next slide, please. So here are the steps we follow to place a child in foster care. So after identification of a child, we do assessment of child's current care arrangement, the need, the overall situation of the child. And based on that, we do then identification of the potential family. So we have a specific tool developed by the subsector, which we are using for screening the family and identify a suitable family for the child. So when we do the assessment of the family, we consider the need of the child. Like for the newborn baby, we look for a family who will be able to breastfeed the child. So once we determined the family, we do the care plan, and we also spend some time to prepare the child and the family before the placement. And during the placement, we do a foster care agreement, and after the placement, the caseworker, like who is actually leading the whole process, the caseworker continue the monitoring the care arrangement, and also continue the regular follow-up visits and review the care plan. And once we confirmed that there is no more protection concern, the caseworker closed the case. Next slide, please. Yeah, so once the child is in foster care, we continue our support to the foster carers and to the children. So the support includes the training for the caregivers. So we have positive parenting training, we have parenting without violence training, and we ensure that all of the foster carers receive that training, including the foster caregivers who are spontaneously fostering a child. And we also ensure that the caregivers are receiving the required support through the referral mechanism, like food, shelter, health, and cash support. But for fostering a child, we don't provide any money or incentive to the caregiver. And at the same time, we continue the psychosocial support to the child and the caregiver. As I said, caseworker continue the regular follow-up visit and review the care plan. And we also ensure that we are not taking any action which can interfere the tracing effort for the child who is separated from the family. Next slide, please. Yeah, there are challenges. This is some of the challenges are similar to our previous experiences, like Bulgaria. So we do face challenges to identify foster parents for infant, for adolescent, and for the children with disability, as like there are some stigma and cultural barriers, superstitions. So parents, they often unwilling to take care of a child with disability, and also for the infant, it's very difficult to find out a family mother who can breastfeed the child. And also ensuring safety of a child who has protection concern in the foster family. Sometimes we also face challenges for that, and sometimes adolescents themselves shows unwillingness to stay with the family. So that's another challenge. And arranging foster care for 2, 3, 4 or more siblings is also difficult, because Rohingya camps is very congested, and every family is already very populated. So sometimes it's very difficult to find out a family who will be able to support 3 or 4 children together. So we already take some steps to overcome those challenges. So we created a pool of foster parents which are trained and prepositioned and ready to support a child during an emergency. And also we orient the foster carers, and we work on build their capacity to manage children who have sign of distress. And at the same time, before the placement, we ensure the children opinion and the views before placing the child. And like when we determining the families, we consider the opinion of the children. And also we created a peer support group of foster carers where they have a chance to share their experience and support each other. Next slide, please. Yeah, so for the Bangladeshi children, the formal foster care is not actually practiced in Bangladesh. So for Bangladesh, the government is operating different type of institutions for the alternative care. So residential care is actually very popular here and mostly practiced. So we have different type of institutions for different age group and different categories of the children, which is run by the government, and there are also some non-government private run orphanages. And for the family-based care, formally it's not supported by the law. Especially adoption is only approved for the Hindu religions, and Muslims cannot adopt a child, but they can take the guardianship under the Children Act 2013. Apart from that, informally, as a cultural practice, the family members and also community people sometimes they provide foster care to the children who are without parent. So yeah, and here Save the Children is also working with the government and doing advocacy to deinstitutionalizations of alternative care, and we are emphasizing on foster care system in the Bangladesh. Thanks everybody for listening me.
Wonderful. Thank you all. It's just so interesting in all the different contexts. So if all of the speakers could turn your video cameras on, we're going to head over to the question and answer period. There's lots of questions already in the Q&A and in the chat box. I'm going to start with a general question. So see which one of you feels brave enough to answer it first. Is about, what are the systems in place in your context to make sure that foster care, some kind of quality assurance for foster care? How do you ensure that the foster care placement is of high quality? Who would like to go first?
Shall I go?
Sure, go for it.
So in terms of the foster placement, I think it starts with the assessment, and then there's regular monitoring visits all the time a child is placed with the foster carers. There's also lots of regular reviews of the foster carers' practice themselves for the child, and for them to feed back on what it's like living with the foster carers. The panel plays a big part in the quality assurance to make sure the assessments are of good quality, but also we go back to panel on a regular basis with reviews, and they monitor the service as well to make sure the foster carers are being supported properly as well. There's also an inspection service as well that happens independently, which helps to do that as well, and it helps ensure that we are listening to children and acting on what they're telling us.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else want to add on that? There was a related question about what to do if a foster family is found to harm the child or not act in their best interest as well.
Maybe I can add to the answer. The system is very similar in Bulgaria. We have a stringent recruitment process, and then there is a lot of monitoring. by child protection. The foster care team supports the family. They provide supervision trainings, monthly top-up trainings, monthly supervision, and participation in self-support groups of foster parents in a given location. But also the panel is reviewing the foster placement, the foster carers on an annual basis. And if there are any concerns, they're investigated, and the foster parents can be suggested for deregistration by the panel, which has happened on the many occasions because the initial high number of foster parents recruited under the national project was at the expense of quality. They just had to report achievement of targets of the EU-funded project. And then there was this concern, and Child Protection was saying, but the foster parents are not up to the job, and we have concerns and there are issues. Some were persuaded to give up fostering on their own volition, but in some cases when they were stubborn and there was suspicion of abuse, like forms of punishment that are not acceptable for children, especially children in foster care, because they sign up a declaration that they will not use these forms of disciplining children, and despite the signature they use them, like spanking on occasion, then they are suggested for deregistration.
Great. Does anyone else have anything to add?
Maybe just to add on to something, in addition to the peer support groups that the foster carers can actually form, at the national level, we have something that is called the Adoptive Parents Association. And we have actually a representative of adoptive parents who actually sits at the national panel. So this is to provide that oversight and also support for parents who are actually going to go through the process. Somebody who understands exactly what has gone through the process, who understands and can provide meaningful support. So that association itself actually provides support to all the members there. And yes, they can actually recommend for somebody to actually be removed as a foster parent.
Oh, very interesting. Thank you, David. There was another question, just because I have you here on the big screen now, about Uganda specifically, about the Ugandan government support in foster care. And there was also a question as to whether or not children need to go through foster care to be adopted in Uganda, if you know if that's accurate or not.
Okay, I'll start with the last question. So yes, in Uganda, if you're going to foster to adopt, you have to go through a fostering period of 1 year. Previously, it was 3 years, but when they amended the Children Act in 2016, it was reduced to 1 year. So somebody actually has to stay within Uganda for that period of time. You're monitored, and then you go through the whole court process of asking for an adoption order for the placement to become permanent. One of the issues we've seen over the years is for foreign nationals, for foreigners, actually, their approval comes from the national alternative care panel. They have to be reviewed by the national alternative care panel to be approved as prospective foster parents or as prospective adoptive parents. However, the locals can actually go to the district alternative care panel set up at the district level, and they can actually be approved from there and receive children. On the other issue of the government having enough support, unfortunately, the probation officers have the mandate to actually supervise every foster care placement within their district of operation. So they actually have very little funding. So there is a gap when it comes to that. They rely so heavily on civil society organizations like us with the social work expertise to be able to assess the parents, to be able to write up these assessments with them, to be able to monitor all the children in foster care, to be able to monitor and actually give recommendations for the children to be approved for foster care and also for the prospective foster parents. So they are actually willing to do the work, but however, the funding is really an issue. So they really rely a lot on the social work expertise of civil society organizations.
And that seems to be like a consistent theme across many of your contexts, where civil society has really kind of provided quite a lot of the foster care support. Galina, I don't know if you have any any thoughts on how that transitions more to the government oversight? Because it sounded like in your presentation, you were talking a lot about how Hope and Homes, provided a lot of the support initially, and then the government did a little bit more. I don't know if you have anything more to say on that.
It wasn't just Hope and Homes, many other NGOs who were working on foster care, and I think some colleagues are participating here. They also provided additional support to foster parents on the project so that these foster parents are able to take more complex children, like babies or disabled children. And all the time we've been advocating that there should be changes in the allowances, that there should be increase in allowances, which has happened now. And foster parents receive better support, better financial support from the state.
Great, thank you. And then there was another question about the motivations of foster parents. So how to motivate people to become foster parents. And then there were also lots of examples where foster carers are not paid or don't receive incentives. So I was wondering about some of the ways that you do motivate foster parents in your context, both financial and in other ways as well. So recruiting foster carers and also motivating them to be foster carers.
Okay, maybe I would go first and then my colleagues would add on. So I think, like Galena said, I think in her presentation, when it came to the recruitment drives, calling on people to take children in, we saw that the rural areas actually are more receptive because these are some of the areas where you'll see the community, I would say, community activism, the community togetherness actually still holds. So we see a lot of the kinship care, mostly in the rural settings where some of the community structures and family cultural values are actually still more predominant. So we usually just talk to them and remind them of exactly what they've been doing, maybe for their brothers, children. It is something that is not new. So sometimes it's all about just putting it into the context of the community you're working in, then they'll understand it in that way, in trying to give a hope, and home to a child actually who is not of their family, but they'll recognize that they've actually been doing this all over the years. So that is something that we do for them, and that's how we approach it to ensure that we have them on board.
Great. So Remy, do you have examples on how you encourage foster families to foster children with disabilities in Cambodia?
Yes, in Cambodia, it's a little bit hard to recruit. For right now, we have a challenge to recruit a family for fostering a child with disability, but we still engage the family in the community that they help the experience to take care for children with disability and let them to share with another family. And after that, the family in the area that they live, they start to interested to foster, and they can see a change of the children with disability because of children in family. We have the ABLE project, and the ABLE project is the special project that we thinking about in Cambodia. The service, the special service of the children with disability is limited. So we don't want to place the child in the orphanage. So we just make it happen we recruitment for family to foster a child with disability, and we provide a special support like therapy service so the child can live in the community and they can grow up with another child and the community can see a change of the child. So another family, they starting to interest to take care and to foster a child with disability. And we have one good story that one of the children with disability that they foster to adopt. Now they already success to adopt. We have one case.
Great, that's wonderful news. Fantastic. There was also a question about child participation and how do you see how do you make child participation a meaningful part of the foster care process, and also how do you measure well-being and outcomes for children. So how do you know that the child is being cared for well in your context?
I would like
Louis-
to share in Cambodia. In
Uh,
Cambodia before, like, so, sorry, Becky, could I share something about experience of Cambodia? Like
Sure.
normally, the people in the community, like they thinking that like they always stigma or discrimination the children with disability. But when we just awareness about the children child right of the children with disability, and we just make the child around in the village to see that children with disability also have a right to, so they understand and they become to like the inclusive children with disability in the community. Like we have the experience one of the that is not a foster care family, but that is a kinship care family that they live in one area, and the neighbor and the children, like the neighbor just talk to their children, so don't play with the stupid boy. It will cause the disability to their children. But after that, children in family, like the ABLE project, just awareness the disability child right to them. They start to be understand, and right now, like they just let the children, their children, to play with this ABLE child.
Wonderful, that's great. Louise, did you have one thing to say about child participation, about how you have encouraged child participation more in your context, and then we'll end.
Yeah, I think one of the really important things has been thinking about children and people with lived experience to interact with other children, because I think there is a bit of a barrier there sometimes for children who find adults around them to be scary people. So that is one thing that we've been doing to actively encourage the participation of children. And there's lots of monitoring in place to ensure that changes are being made based on the feedback of children.
Wonderful. I'd like to thank all of you. There's been so many really interesting questions. I want to thank each of our panelists, Louise, Galina, Taslima, Soreni, and David, for your fantastic presentation today. I think we've just scratched the surface of all of the different ways of developing foster care. And I think there's certainly more to come as we look at improving the quality of foster care and family-based care placements for children globally. I'd like to thank the Martin James Foundation, and I'd like to thank the Better Care Network for bringing everyone together. We will definitely share these. We hope that these kind of webinars encourage practitioners to come together to discuss good practice, but also share where we're getting stuck and where we can move forward to really improve the lives of children as they transition out of institutional care and into family and community-based care. So thank you so much today, and thank you.